Hi, I'm Jim,
And I'm Kevin,
and we are.
the Signal Brothers. Hey, welcome back to another edition of the Signal Brothers, where today we're going to talk about the Second Amendment. This is a big deal for us. We're very passionate about it. And Jim, I'm going to go ahead and pop up. And why don't you cover this for us?
Yes, the Second Amendment reads a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
So that's what we're talking about today.
Hmm.
Listen, just so everybody knows, we love to get questions in the chat, right? So if you got questions related to our subject, please put them in the chat because we'd love to answer your questions. We answer questions pretty regularly as people put them in there, as long as they're related to the subject. And hey, if you're passionate about something and want to be a guest on our podcast, would you let us know? We'd love to have you on. We'd like to. We've had Emilio on one time. We'd like to have other folks on. So if there's something you're passionate about, talk to Jim or I, and we'd be happy. And lastly, if you got an idea or a subject for us to cover, let us know. Matter of fact, somebody put something in the chat right on your Facebook chat. Uh, when you were putting in about
Yeah,
IDs, right? What are we going to cover
yeah,
2 weeks from now? The requirement to have to show ID to get stuff, right? So that's going to be our next subject, right? So please, we love to get ideas from the audience. So Jim, let's jump into it. Let's talk about the Second Amendment.
yes. A highly contested, every time something happens, which we all know we don't like to see happen. We go straight into any disaster, school shootings, anything like that. We go straight into gun control. And even with the Second Amendment, and a number of times, even in just recent years, the Supreme Court has clarified what that means. They still try to enact gun bans. And, it's not, it's tragic. And we don't like to see it happen. But I mean, a gun is just a tool like anything else. And there's other instances of attacks with knives, vehicles driving through crowds. I mean, it's not the tool, it's the person or persons and what their intent is and what how they feel and what's in their heart kind of thing. It's not the tool that does this.
No, I agree. I agree with you, Jim, on that. So the question is, right, what does shall not be infringed really means, right? What does that mean?
Hmm.
Because, to me, uh, we have the right to bear arms, but I'm a firm believer that there should be some checks and balances in control, in place, right? Because
Hmm.
there's some people, right, that rightfully shouldn't be carrying guns, right? I
Right.
think we're all in agreement. So
Yeah.
there's some people out there that shouldn't be carrying guns. So there are, I think, some valid reasons to put some controls in place, right? And do common sense stuff. I don't think banning weapons, Jim, is the answer because cocaine's illegal, doesn't stop people from using cocaine, right? I'm going to use that as an example, right? So you want to ban stuff. I, I'm not for banning because banning doesn't solve the problem, right?
Mm-mm.
It just creates an illegal trade, and people that really want the gun or whatever it is that's illegal, they're going to get it anyhow, right? So one of the things I have said is, to drive a car, you need a driver's license, right? Well, I believe everybody that owns a gun, Jim, anybody that owns any type of gun whatsoever, right? You should have to demonstrate proficiency with it. You should know how to load it and unload it, right?
Hmm.
Keep it safe, locked up in your home, especially if you have children in the home, right? There's some basic common sense stuff, right? To drive a boat, you got to take the boater safeties course, right? Everybody's got to take that course, right? So there should be a gun safety course, right? Everybody's required to take in order to own a gun. So when we get into, yeah,
Well,
so just hear me out on this, and then I'll pass it back to you. When it comes to the what we call the assault weapons, and some of these weapons that they're classified assault weapons are not really assault weapons. right? So we have different classes of licenses, right? So if you want to drive a car, you get a regular driver's license, right? If you want to drive a bus or you want to drive a rig, right, you need a higher level license. I don't know why we don't do that for some of these weapons, right? And in a way that uses common sense.
Yeah. Well, there are some, like you, I don't think there's enough, but there are some. If you're going to own a gun that you're just going to keep in your home, you're not going to carry it around, you know. And again, a lot of my perspective is my state that I live in. So just having said that, I could go buy a gun, go through the checks, background checks, and all that, and have it in the house and not have to do anything else. Or, you know, of course, being former military, we know how to handle weapons a bit better than, you know, the lay person. Not everyone, but you know what I'm saying. But to get a higher level license, like you're talking about, I have a concealed carry permit. You do have to take a class. You have to take a class with an individual. You have to pass that class. You have to get a special license. You have to, and the background checks are unbelievable. And that's where I think a lot of the problem is people that are touting gun control. And I should clarify by saying total gun control. I don't think many of them have ever tried to buy a gun and seen how difficult it is. The checks that you have to go through, and especially in my case and others like me who are not born in this country, it's a lot more difficult. There's more steps I got to go through. There's more steps they got to go for background checks. It's not easy to buy it from a registered dealer. Now, there's where the caveat is. In a lot of places, if I go to you, Kevin, and buy a gun from you, I don't have to show squat. I go to a gun show and buy from a private citizen there. I don't have to show anything. But there are places, I've bought guns at gun shows before, and they on the spot at the county fairgrounds run the same background checks that they run on me at the store. So it could be tweaked a little bit, but there are a lot of checks on there, and it's your local law enforcement, it's federal law enforcement, and of course a lot of it's the honor system, though. You got to, you know, say that, hey, I've never been incapacitated due to mental defect, you know, however that's worded. If you're a felon, you can't get a gun, and that's an easy check on, you know, on your background. So it doesn't matter how you answer that. So there are checks, and they approach the people that are for the gun bans approach this as if we don't have any. You know, any Joe can just walk out there and get a gun for any reason. And the people that you have to worry about that are going to use a gun for unlawful means are going to get the gun by unlawful means. So these bans aren't going to work anyway, like you were saying a moment ago.
Yeah, so I'll agree a lot with you. So you bring up two good points that I want to hit on. One is I'm actually a big fan of universal background checks, right? So they shouldn't, you know, I think we got to consolidate the background check program, right? So that when a search is done for you to buy a weapon, it's comprehensive, right? Because there are, and the other issue you brought up is, like you said, what the rules are in Tennessee. Virginia's somewhat similar, but there are states, Jim, that don't have a lot of these controls in place, right? Mm-hmm. There are states that don't. So there needs to be a standard, right, on this, in my opinion. A, universal background checks. B, just like the boater safety course, firearm safety course that I can take online and show that, hey, I've taken the firearm safety course. I understand the rules of the road with a weapon. Those should be standard things that you got to do, right? Mm-hmm. And then you and I both are concealed carry holders, right? Concealed carry, right? There's a higher level of scrutiny put on it, right? And you get that in Virginia, it's every 5 years I got to renew it. Right. And if I choose not to renew it, it automatically expires. There's no reminder. They don't remind you or anything. So it's up to you to take the effort to renew it. And so, you know, for the high capacity magazines, for the semi-automatic rifles and things of that nature, such as AK-47 or, you know, M4, M16, right, AR-15, I think there should be another tier, right, things you have to go through, right, to own one of those, right? So banning it doesn't solve anything, because if I want it, I can still get it, right? All you're doing is you're punishing those that are law-abiding citizens. That's what you're doing. You're infringing on those people that are law-abiding citizens. You know, Jim, one other thing that I am a fan of that doesn't exist in Virginia, but I definitely agree about, is the cooling off period when you want to buy a weapon, right? Of 3 days, or, you know, some states have 7 days. I think it's good. And the reason I think it's good is because it makes sure there's a conscious effort to buy that weapon, right? Because at the heat of the moment, I think there's people that have bought weapons at the heat of the moment and gone and done crazy things. So I'm a big fan of that, right? None of those things that I'm talking about infringe your right to own a weapon. They just put necessary controls in place to ensure, right, that the people that are handling guns, right, are doing the right thing.
Yeah, no problem with that whatsoever. You know, make sure, like you were talking about driver's licenses and such. Yeah, I have no problem with that at all. My biggest concern is, like you were saying, a universal. If we're talking about the Second Amendment, that is a federal right. It should be taken care of on a federal level. The states regulating it, and they all regulate it so widely different. I mean, that's yeah, we need something a bit more universal.
Yeah, so as you know, right now Congress is working on the National Concealed Carry Reciprocity, right? Great. Glad you're doing that, but there's got to be some standards in place for that to work, right? Because I could be in a state that doesn't have any licensing requirements for uh, uh, concealed carry, and there are states that have strict controls in place for concealed carry. So that's got to be standardized, right? I think it's just a quick knee-jerk reaction, and I think before they go ahead and move forward anything like that, they, just like you're talking about, standardizing. I'm all about giving the states the rights, right? I'm not about taking away the states' individual rights. But as you said, this is something federally mandated in the Constitution and should have these things standardized since it's related to the Second Amendment.
There's a difference between the state regulating a law and creating the law and then regulating it. I agree, the states should be able to regulate it, but once a federal law is established, which Second Amendment I kind of already thought it was, but you know,
it's part of the Constitution. It's the Second Amendment to the Constitution, so it's the law of the land, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I agree with you, man. I think this is a really big deal. You know, we were talking about things that you can do that would have an impact, right, on violence, right? So one of the things that I think is super important is the RAND organization. And I'm thinking probably a lot of people are not going to be able to see this too well, but I'm going to add it to the stage anyhow. Oh, I got to remove this one. There we go. I just got to be smarter than technology, Jim. So this is from the RAND organization. So I think it's pretty trusted, right? I think the RAND, I think it's respected. I think people can say the RAND is a respected organization. And it shows here, you know, policies regulating who may legally own, purchase, or possess a firearm. And it says that prohibitions associated with domestic violence, it has a moderate impact. That's a good thing. It means it's having an effect. That's common sense, right? That's common sense. If somebody is a domestic violence abuser, we don't want them to have guns, right, in the home, right? Another one is surrender firearms by prohibited possessors. We talked about that. People that are felons, right? So there. Look, background checks have a moderate impact. They do. And waiting periods have a moderate impact. So everything that I think we should be doing, right? Instead of banning weapons, but putting common sense practices in place, is supported by this research done by the RAND organization, right? And look, stand your ground laws are supportive. Concealed carry laws are supportive. Child access prevention laws, making sure kids don't get a hold of guns, right, at home, is supportive. right? So everything we're talking about, um, keeping guns free and accessible to buy, but putting common sense controls and regulations in place to prevent the wrong people from getting a hold of them is what I think is important.
Yeah, you got to think though. It's apples and oranges, because once we're done with the laws, once we're done with all the analysis of what works and what doesn't work, then you've got the other side. I want to go do something questionable. I'm not going to go and fill out an application to buy a gun to do it. So in that point, none of those laws do any good, nor would any new ones that they're going to pass.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem is. And the thing is, when you listen to your anti-gun lobbyists, they're honing on that whole thing. They're putting us all in the same category. It's like, well, we need to create new laws. Okay, yeah, fine, knock yourself out. But it's not going to affect the people that aren't obeying the current laws. They're going to disobey them as well. I'm not going to go plan to do something criminal. I was going to give an example and say, hey, I'm going to go and create a paper trail for myself by buying a gun, letting every law enforcement agency know that I'm buying that gun, and then go use it to do that criminal act. I'm not going to do that. When I go down the street and pay, I don't know, 40, 50 bucks, to a junkie, get a gun and then toss it when I'm done. And that's what they're doing. And even that being, when they talk about, what new laws they want, they don't ever really list them out. And when they do, they're laws that already exist. I mean, apples and oranges. You got two entirely different scenarios. Everybody's focusing on the one. You're never going to solve the criminal element. You're just never. There's always going to be crime. There's always going to be somebody, like you were saying with drugs. If they want to get them, they're going to get them. We can pass all the laws we want to. They're still going to get them. How do you deter that? The only thing you can do is react to it. You can't. How proactive can you be when you don't even know what guy's going to go down the street and buy a gun from a junkie? I mean, it's an inherent problem that really has no strong solution.
I think guns on the legal market cost a lot more, Jim. I don't think you can get them for $50, but I definitely agree that they're out there and they're
Old
available.
movies.
Yeah. I think they're available. I think they're more expensive. And there's we did have a assault weapons ban in place for 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. And so I went to factcheck.org, and this is the claim that President Biden made about, hey, we bought down mass killings. But if you look here in this write-up, right, it says that it really didn't, when you consider in the population growth, that it really didn't bring it down, right? Now, I went to the National Institutes of Health researching this, and according to the National Institute of Health, they have some interesting charts and things of that nature that show a definite correlation of it's spiking right after. It looks on all the charts, it looks like it's going up, but you have to look at, there are many things to look at. Another thing that was interesting about some of the reading I did, it said that it dropped to record lows during the pandemic. It said during the COVID, because why? People weren't out in mass, right? People were staying home. People were avoiding each other. So I find that quite interesting. But I think the one thing that a lot of these studies talk about is a mass shooting is one that includes deaths of 4 or more people in all these studies. Even the NIH study had that in there, right? And so it's interesting that factcheck.org has said that it really is not, when you consider population growth, it really did not have the impact that President Biden touted. One of the interesting things in all the reading I did in the NIH reading and fact check had to do with high capacity magazines, right? Because that was also part of the assault weapons ban, right? And those were banned. You couldn't have a magazine. You couldn't purchase magazines that held 10 or more rounds, right? So I'm fully for that. I got to be honest with you. I have no problem with a 10 round. Why do you need more than a 10 round magazine? I don't know. If there's a reason, I mean, somebody's got to tell me, right?
Yeah, I've got no problem with that either.
Yeah. 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 Oh, hey, Bart, thanks, man. I'm glad you're here listening in. We appreciate you. Yeah. So we got to do common sense approaches to things we do, right? That's the bottom line, right? Nobody says this is the extreme we go to because we're tearing at the emotions of people. Every time a tragedy happens in public, right? We peel back people's emotions, right? And we get overreactive, right? Instead of getting to the root cause of the problem, not the gun, but the processes to obtain the gun are the problem, right? And I think this is what our politicians miss 100%, right? We've talked about immigration. It's the same thing, root cause of immigration, the issues, right? Is Congress needs to get busy and get serious. Our elected representatives have to study the root causes of these things. The RAND organization study shows some impacts on how you can mitigate the violence with guns. When are they going to start looking at the facts and start doing things that make sense? I don't know, Jim.
I agree, but you've heard the saying, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." They just jump right on that to push their agenda, which is one of those things being gun control. And while I agree with you that in the definition that you found that 4 or more people with mass shooting, but that's 4 or more people that got hit. If you go into somewhere that's got 100 people and you happen to be a lousy shot and miss everybody, in my definition, that's still a mass shooting.
Understood. I'm just going by the studies that
Yeah.
were done by NIH and the RAND Corporation. I agree with you.
Absolutely.
Right? But I think minimizing the magazine, the number of rounds of magazine hold, because now what do you got to do? You got to unload the magazine, put another magazine in, right? So I'm definitely for that. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds morbid, but you'd rather have 10 people killed than 30. I mean, it's you know what I mean. It don't sound right, but you know what I mean. But yeah, I've got no real big deal with banning high capacity magazines. I mean, there could be reasons you need them, but I mean, I just, even a hunter, you wouldn't need it as a hunter. I mean, why would you need it? The fact that you can have it, I can see the argument there, but again, let's give a little. I mean, we can give a little to tone down some of the perspective, violence. But you hit on a good point. We're not looking at the core of the problem. The core of the problem, and you can argue this all day long, depending on who you're talking to and how old the person is you're having this discussion with, is when I was a kid and I did something wrong, I got knocked across the room. I knew there was a consequence for my action. That's not the case anymore. We got gentle parenting, we got timeouts, we got participation trophies. You're never told you failed, you're never told you succeeded. You're all given the same thing. I mean, that is not the way. Life doesn't work like that. You can't raise somebody to live a life like that doesn't exist. I mean, where would I would be in jail or dead if my mom didn't knock me across the room on occasion. I'm 100% serious. You've got to have that knowledge and that sometimes that sting of a consequence to make you think, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I shouldn't be doing these things.
Well, we got a quick question from Chris, and he said, "Hey, is there a difference between military and civilian carry?" And Chris, what I would say to you is no, because the Second Amendment expressly says, right, of the people, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, right? So I think military law enforcement, there's a right for them to carry, right, based on their position and duty. And I think, Chris, what we're focused on is right, We're focused on the civilian side, right? And the Second Amendment clearly gives people the right to bear arms, and it shall not be infringed to bear arms. So, and the whole crux of our conversation is, what does infringe shall not be infringed really mean, right? And that's what I think today, and what's the whole time when there's been issues with bans and attempted bans, Chris, is what does that mean? Shall not be infringed.
Mhm. It brings up a good point too. He does that. If you and I, and we can have our 10-round magazines, and we have, our first responders and our police and our military walking around with 30-round magazines, you get into that idea where if the government decided to say, hey, we're going to suppress our people now, we're outgunned. we may not be outgunned, but we're out ammoed.
Sure enough. But I still believe in the right to carry there's a lot of reasons. Jim, you and I have said we're both concealed carry permit holders, right?
Mm-hmm.
We both carry in public, right? For defense purposes only, right? And so, obviously I'm not going to be carrying an M16 or AK-47 concealed, right? Because you can't conceal that. But I absolutely disagree with trying to get rid of those weapons, because all these laws, right? One of the biggest problems I have is all of them grandfather, right? If you own it, right, then it's grandfathered. Well, I tell you what, if Congress starts taking up that legislation this year for assault weapons ban, what's everybody going to do, right? Everybody's going to go out and start buying them, right? So that it's grandfathered, right? Because of the grandfather clause, right? What does that do to the price of the weapons? Drives it up, right? So there are millions of them in the population today. So I don't know why we think today, if they're gonna offer a grandfather clause, I don't know why they think that it's going to have an impact. I think if you look at the number of assault weapons that were purchased between 2004 and 2025, right, 21 years, it's probably grown exponentially. So I don't think we're solving anything, Jim, by doing it.
Mm-hmm. There's always ways around as well, and not just by the bad guys, but the government as well, to infringe it. I'll give you an example. Concealed carry permit holder. I have my gun. I'm driving around. I'm doing the right thing. I get to work, supermarket, whatever the case may be. Get a call from my kid. There's an emergency and I have to go pick him up at school. Now, I am not allowed to bring that weapon onto school grounds. What do I do?
Absolutely.
What do I do? Do I throw it in the trash? Do I, even if it's sitting in the car hidden, it's still against the law. Now, I go to the VA hospital. That's federal property. What do I do? So they're gonna get you one way or another.
Absolutely.
I've had that problem for years. I've never really been able to come up with a good solution other than just to hope and pray someone doesn't have to look in my car for some reason.
Well, Jim, I worked in the Pentagon for 10 years, and I couldn't take a weapon with me on the Pentagon reservation property, even in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. Wasn't allowed to have a gun, so never carried one when I went to work. I have seen a few folks, though, that have forgotten that they had a gun in their backpack.
Yeah.
And they obviously no longer work there anymore after that, but that's a whole nother story. But that's an interesting thing. It's a valid point about restrictions also on certain areas, right? That's an issue too.
Now, Tennessee did come up with they called it a gun and trunks law, and I can't remember. It's been, I don't know, 8 years or so. And basically, you are allowed to put it somewhere where it can't be seen, your trunk, your glove box or something, and then you're covered. And I don't remember how far that extends and how far that coverage extends, but it gives you a little bit of something to work with in those scenarios.
Sure. So, I was looking, and they are, like I said, there is a committee in the Senate where they are putting together another assault weapons ban. There is a
Yeah.
bill in the works. There
Yeah,
are
I'm sure.
9 states. There are 9 states plus DC is 10. Even though DC is not a state and shouldn't be, that's a whole nother subject for another podcast. Um, that have assault weapons bans in place. But the other 40 states don't. So what's stopping me from? So if I own a, if I, so here's a question: I own a assault rifle, and I move to one of those states. Do I have to give it up? I don't know, right? So this goes back to Jim, the point about, since the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution, any guidelines or restrictions or anything should be mandated federally so that we're standard across the board in all 40 states.
Hmm.
I think you and I are both firm believers that the state should have the rights to regulate and govern as they need. But related to this, because it's part of the Constitution, any controls or restrictions put in place should be done at the federal level, should be standardized at the federal level.
Yes, and like I alluded to earlier, the Supreme Court has several times over the last few years, even just recently, clarified the Second Amendment in many cases. So I mean, there really is no misreading of this. I mean, we got a case in 2024, case in 2022, 2016, 2010, 2008. All of those clarifying that and other amendments when it involves the Second Amendment. So, I mean, we've got plenty of clarification. We just need the regulation that the states can't pick and choose, to enforce or to add to or to take away from, or, it's just, yeah, we need a better federal regulation of it.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean banning things. Banning
Right.
doesn't solve it, right?
Right. The interesting thing is I pulled up the FBI stats, and where I went, the latest they have is 2019, which I found odd, but we can use it. It'll give us the colors we need. And total firearm homicides for 2019 was 10,258. Handguns, 6,368 of those. Rifles, now they didn't break it up to assault versus hunting rifles or anything like that, but rifles, 364. So if we're talking assault weapon ban, that's obviously a rifle. We're getting a very tiny fraction of what the problem is.
100%.
Yeah. And shotguns, 200. That's even less. And you can go buy a shotgun for a couple $100 legally, and you really don't have to do a whole lot other than the initial background check. Just pop that sucker in your house. I mean, so what would an assault weapon actually do other than the crazies that are going to get them elsewhere anyway?
So one of the things I did look at, right, and this is an interesting study. I don't know who does it. I don't know their political leaning. I'm looking at it for just the fact. I try to stay away from the political stuff, right? I use many, many sites. So I put that out there for people listening in, right, which is interesting. So the 9 states listed here, according to this website, have the strongest gun laws, and it appears that they have violence rates that are a lot lower, right? And if you look at states making progress, they tend to be somewhat higher. States that are missing key laws kind of falls out. What I think is interesting is here it lists states where the gun laws are very, very lax, and the amount of gun violence that occurs in those states. And so I think there's a relation. I think there's a clear relationship into having common sense stuff like we've talked about, right, in place, and why it's important to have. I think some of the states, I'll talk about California specifically, goes a little too far, right? I think it's a little too extreme in California. I have families in California. I understand some of the challenges that they go through. to even own a gun. But I think there's definitely putting the right things in place can have a positive impact in the violence that happens with guns.
Yeah. You also got to look at, I think a big problem are repeat offenders is one, because, we talked about the criminal element and them going behind the laws. Because this kind of thing, everything you do, every part of society, every part of law, everything you're going to do is have a little bit of an effect. You get people out there that committing violent crimes, because we're talking violence, so we won't talk about drug offenses and stuff. We'll talk about violent crimes. They're given slap on the wrist after slap on the wrist after slap on the wrist. They're released early. They're put on parole instead of serving jail. They're out on the streets when they shouldn't be, is where I'm going with that. And we don't punish, I don't think, criminals anywhere near. And even when we do give them a good sentence, we let them out in a quarter of the time. So what is the answer there? If we keep these guys incarcerated longer, eventually they're going to get out. But I mean, if they're going to get out in 25 years versus getting out in 5, there's a 20-year buffer where they're not hurting anybody. I mean, sometimes that's all you can ask for, but still, that's a buffer zone where they're not hurting anybody. We're way too easy on criminals, especially violent offenders. Certain crimes, victimless, that's a whole different discussion. But violent crimes, we're still just way too lenient. And that's part of the problem too, because these guys know, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to be treated with kid gloves, and you're not talking mass shooting. Say you're talking just one person shoot somebody else in anger. They throw up, I was raised wrong and I had a bad childhood and everything. And he killed somebody. He's in jail for 3 years. Should that guy be out walking around? That's part of the problem, is we're too soft on criminals to begin with. If we weren't, we'd still have some problems, absolutely, but they might not be as bad. If you saved one life with harsher criminal penalties, isn't it worth it?
Yeah, repeat offenses are a big deal. So there are some states have 3-strike laws, right, as far as offenses, and that's probably something that needs to be addressed with violating and talk about violent crime, specifically violent crime. I agree with that 100%, Jim. Super important.
Yeah, that, and I think we're getting better, but mental health treatments, because I mean, if the whole thing, it sounds cliche, but I mean, if you see something, say something. You see somebody, that's having an obvious problem one day or a couple days in a row, and they're not acting like themselves, talk to them. Or you see somebody just doing something, all kind of weird stuff, like even, they used to talk about this about suicide, when you see people giving their stuff away or taking chances that they wouldn't normally take, or things like that. This person might be in a mental health crisis. And sometimes all it would take would be to just say, hey, you okay? Let's go get a drink and talk about this. Anything. I think we're getting better about it. We got the hotlines. We got the places for veterans that are put up. We got, people are more aware. I think in some cases it can be a little abused, but I think we're doing better than we have in past years. That's also a factor. What are these guys going through? What's happening? If you have a 17-year-old who all of a sudden is started dressing in all black and all he's doing is painting death stuff in his notebook at school, he might just be acting out. It might be more. So.
No, I definitely agree about the mental health part. One of the problems is, though, when I can't speak about the whole United States, but I can speak about here where I live.
Right.
Somebody needs mental health, right? First question you get called when you get asked if you want mental health counseling is what? Do you have insurance, right? We got to be able to provide mental health counseling to folks, and insurance and payment should not be a precursor to getting the help you need. Number one. Number two, those services are hard to come by, right? Some people have to wait a long time to get an appointment for counseling, right? So it's definitely, I think the mental health thing and getting counseling, right, is super important. I think you hit the nail on the head on that, Jim. I think it's
Mhm.
extremely important, and I think we don't put enough emphasis on that whatsoever.
No, we don't. But that's like what got me on that path was you talking about the underlying problem, which that of course is one. So what do we do? When we see something like that, what do we do? Because I talked a moment ago about the guys that go behind the laws and around the laws. We can't do much to stop that. So we've kind of got to be proactive. How do we stop them from getting to that point? How do we stop getting them being a repeat offender? Get them before the first offense. And I mean, I know that's not always possible because you don't live in a society where you regulate everything everybody does. So every now and then you're going to get somebody that's going to commit a crime. You don't know this, you don't know until they do it. Unfortunately, that's a reality. But when you got repeat offenders, let's not let them get to that point, you know. And your at-risk youth, your at-risk neighborhoods, you know, I don't mean to point things out, but because I was in a bad neighborhood, and look at me. It's just, I'm not trying to relegate to a certain ethnic population. There's rough neighborhoods everywhere. There's high risk neighborhoods everywhere. What's going on in those neighborhoods? Are we just letting them rot, letting them sit there and just police themselves and stay an isolated area of that because nobody wants to go down there? I mean, there's just so many things we could talk about that could be addressed for these underlying problems that gets people to committing these acts.
Well, it's interesting. I'm on the National Institutes of Health's website looking over the relationship between mental health and gun violence. And believe it or not, uh, a majority of, I mean, a very small percentage of people with mental health issues are tied to gun violence. And it says the public perception of a strong link between mental health illness and violence is fueled in part by news coverage of mass shootings, right? So
I believe it.
that's the coverage of and we've talked about the media and the impacts, positive and negative, that the media has out there. So that's interesting. And it says here, two studies have directly linked news media coverage with high profile acts of violence by persons with serious mental illness to negative public attitudes towards the group, right? So that's from the National Institutes of Health. So that's very, very interesting, right?
Well, you think, I mean, I guess if you have a person that's so mentally bad that everybody sees it, they're not going to be committing any crimes because they're going to be taken care of. If you got somebody like the 17-year-old kid that I've referenced, he's more likely going to be suicidal than homicidal. So I guess that makes sense. I guess it
Yeah.
makes sense. And it comes down to the parent. If his parents own guns, where do you think he's going to get them? Need to be locked down, like you said earlier. You be a responsible gun owner. Make sure those guns are locked away from your children. Even if you have, children you've trained, all their lives, 15, 16, 17 years old, you still don't want them having free access to that.
In Virginia, a couple years back, a 10-year-old bought a gun to school, shot his teacher, and he had problems. And that parent, right, obviously is in jail. But that's the thing that scares me is, like you said, with kids in the house, the guns need to be locked up, right? There needs to be controls in place so things like that don't happen, right? That's part of that gun safety course that should be mandated for you to take, right? And that should be ensuring that there are controls in place to keep weapons secure in the home. Right. I agree with that 100%. That's non-negotiable for me.
Yeah. I mean, kids, you've got good, you got good kids. They get good grades. They listen to you. But they're still kids.
Yeah.
I mean, being a dumb kid shouldn't be a death sentence.
No, I agree. Yeah. And some kids just bring the gun to school not because they want to shoot somebody, because they want to be cool, right? Look
Hmm.
what I got. I got a gun. So, yeah, I definitely think it's something that needs to be addressed, Jim. That all very, very valid.
Yeah. But bans, no, that's not the way to go. I don't know
Yeah,
why they keep
yeah,
doing that.
yeah.
I don't know how many times they're going to get shot down. Are they trying to win it by attrition? Just they're so tired of me trying it. Let's just give him his gun ban so he'll shut up. I mean, that's the only logic I see.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Going back to the kid stuff though, Jim, what I
Mhm.
do like is that they're holding parents accountable now,
Oh yeah,
right? Right? Parents are being held accountable for their kids' actions. 100%. 100%. You are responsible for your
yeah,
kids. You're responsible for what they do, both good and bad,
yeah,
right? So I agree with that 100%.
yeah. There is a time I remember thinking that we had lost that because I remember things that I did as a kid, nothing greatly serious that caused any great damage or things have gone a little bit different, but my mother could go to jail. I remember that from when I was a kid. I seen other kids do things and their parents got in trouble. I was like, why am I getting in trouble? He did it. I was like, he's your child. You're responsible for him. And somewhere along the lines, we lost that. It's good to see it coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jim, I don't know about you. I think we've exhausted this topic. I think we've done a pretty good job covering it. We're right at 46 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm excited. 2 weeks from now, right? 2 weeks from now, we're going to do the next podcast, Jim.
Yeah, what is that? The 16th or the 18th?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah.
And we're going to be talking about
ID
ID,
checks.
the need for ID, right? To buy items or to vote or for a myriad of things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
why you need IDs for certain things and you don't need ID to do other things, right? And make certain purchases to do certain things. So should be an interesting topic. It was recommended by one of Jim's friends, so we're definitely going to do that for our next podcast 2 weeks from today. So I want to thank people that are tuning in. We do appreciate the support. It's super important. I just can't emphasize enough. If you'd like to be a guest and be on here, if you're passionate about something, please let us know. We'd love to have some guests on here. And we don't want people that agree with us, right? We want people that disagree. We're okay if you don't agree with
Mm-hmm.
what our perspective. We want to talk to people that have a different perspective. So don't think because we don't agree with you or you have a different opinion on some of the topics we presented that we don't want you on here. That's not the case. We actually would love to have you on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, even if you don't want to be on here, just like Jim's friend that made the recommendation about ID restrictions, right, for purchases, hey, got an idea? Let us know. We'll be happy to have you on.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm Kevin,
I'm Jim,
and we are.
the Signal Brothers.
Have a good one, folks. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone.